when one speaks of awakening, it means dehypnotization, coming to your senses. But of course, to do that, you have to go out of your mind.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place.
The healthcare system imagines the human to be a very complicated machine. We have medicines that can adjust the dial. Blood pressure, oh, turn that down. Blood sugar, oh, turn that down. We haven't done anything to touch the heart and soul of a patient.
There's no one that's been able to conceptualize it for him. Well, they learned that he had this history of mental illness, and they sent him home. So the one avenue that he could have gotten relief from cut him off because of the stigma of his mental illness.
Sighting or awakening those pathways, we have a gateway to stimulate and reach somebody who otherwise is unreachable.
Voices of people around me.
I felt like the world would be better off without me.
My mental health problem means that I go through many highs and lows which I struggle to control.
Sometimes I just want to hide away. It's so normal that 1 in 4 adults actually suffer from some sort of mental illness. Now,
Music connects people with who they have been.
Well, good evening, folks. We're here in the studio at Jess FM with our guests, David Gobbert.
Val Davey.
Val Davey. And another host, Dylan Hargreaves, and myself, David Roberts. We're here tonight to kick off the Mental Health Awareness Week. In some cases, it's a month, is it not? Or
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Always a great time to talk about mental health.
One can never be.
It's all year long for some of us.
Yeah. So, from my understanding, mental health, one mental health awareness campaign, at least, that was launched by Bell Telephone, like I gather, is a very big donor in terms of support for mental health awareness. Have considered 4 pillars to mental health awareness, being firstly anti-stigmatization, secondly, yes, care and access to care, and thirdly, education, and fourthly, awareness in the workplace. So tonight I hope that we'll deal primarily with firstly access to services within our community and so on. So I'd like you two fellows, if you would, to introduce the services that your agency might offer. And then later in the program we'll discuss the anti-stigmatization aspect of it, probably after a bit of a break. So Val, I wonder if you might start. I understand you might have to leave for another program partway through for another engagement. So firstly, I wonder if you could just tell us about your role with the Alberta Health Services and the services that are provided to the community through your agency.
For the past 10 years, I've worked with seniors mental health outreach. At the time of our inceptions, we were kind of new kids on the block, but there's been a number of other agencies that have come along since then. So our focus is on seniors, and the traditional service through mental health was to go to the doctor, go to the clinic, go to the hospital, but go somewhere. With the outreach concept, we basically go where people are in their homes, the facilities that they reside in, and attempt to, assess what their needs are with them, and then attempt to support them as we access the required resources that they're looking for, or that they need.
Do you find that there is a large demand in terms of, I guess, seniors' mental health issues?
Good question. I think when our team was designed, it was to address the aging population of those that were experiencing mental health problems. Mm-hmm. So people that had been diagnosed earlier in their life and attended clinics or been hospitalized. But what we see is certainly we serve that population, but increasingly we are serving people who have not been a part of the mental health system in the past, but in the aging process, there begins to be losses of friends, losses of family, losses of function, loss of skills, loss of driver's license, all impacting upon a person's emotional well-being. You mentioned the workplace. Work means a lot to people, and some are required to retire before they're ready to, and that again represents a big loss in their lives. So, but I think that what Lethbridge and Southern Alberta have to offer is a great plethora of services for those that are experiencing mental health challenges.
I have a curiosity of my own in terms of the whole field of autism. Is the kind of thing that basically, for a person my age, children weren't screened in those days. In fact, autism was barely just a new kid on the block, so to speak. There wasn't a lot of research done. There wasn't a lot of, to my knowledge at least, and children weren't screened. So what becomes of those adults that perhaps struggled throughout their life with some form of, on the spectrum somewhere, and later in life, we're told that they probably would be diagnosed on the spectrum had they been, had there been those services available.
I'll defer that question. I'm certainly no specialist on autism. Earlier in my career, those that stood out were the savants, those that had special skills and talents, could name off every car, play the piano like Mozart, but no, it's not an area of expertise that I am with you.
Okay, and could you tell us a little bit about your work and
Sure. So my role is with Canadian Mental Health Association, the Alberta South region. So Canadian Mental Health is, as the name suggests, a nationwide network of different agencies, but the way we're set up, each agency in each region is a completely separate entity, which allows us to tailor the needs to the needs of the region so that we can look and see what's going on. And like Val said, we're very lucky here in Lethbridge that there is a great network, a plethora of agencies that allow us to provide quality services in our field. And if there's something that us at CMHA recognize as a need but can't provide ourselves, we can refer to teams such as Seniors Mental Health Mental Outreach, other services through Alberta Health Services, or some of the other absolutely amazing agencies that exist in this community.
And in terms of Mental Health Awareness Week itself, what sort of initiatives are taking place locally?
All sorts. So on Wednesday, we actually did yoga on the side of the coulee with AHS organized that along with the YWCA. Brought some yoga instructors out just to promote mental wellness in people's lives, to find that meaningful daily activity that people can just engage in and have that sense of belonging and that sense of acceptance for who they are. Mm-hmm. Other activities that we have done this week have just been taking part in the big online campaign, which is our Get Loud campaign, to try and get people talking about mental health across Canada. So you mentioned the Bell Let's Talk Day that happens every January. We want to get people talking about it, not just in January, not just for the week in May, but continually talking and getting comfortable about talking about mental health in the same way that people would be comfortable talking about going for a flu vaccine or those sort of things, where it is an approachable topic that people can have a conversation about and find the resources that people can access in the community.
For me, what got me excited about this whole project was the idea that I'd like to focus not just on mental illness, of course, but on mental wellness as well, particularly mental health, and paths towards wellness of all sorts. And you mentioned yoga. I hope that perhaps our fourth session will deal with those sorts of things that lead to a healthier mindset and a healthier lifestyle. So perhaps we can get some information from you later with regard to those contacts that you in the coolies. Dylan, did you have anything that you wanted to address with either David or Val?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing that I'm picking up on here is how you're talking about accessing services, and I think that is a huge challenge for a lot of people. I know when I was at Lethbridge College, I worked quite closely with the counseling service that was there at the time, and a huge part of our work and our campaign with them was sort of that awareness of not only that there is support, but how to access that support. And so what I'm curious to ask is for you to, both dealing with different types of people, maybe a little bit here and there, some differences, but if somebody is thinking that they want to access support, whether they're in crisis or not, and they're just looking for improvement, how does that process start? What's the best way?
I think we pick up on that during that initial assessment, and what seniors mental health outreach can offer is not just that knowledge of those resources that are available, but with our mobility, we can support that individual actually accessing that physically.
Yeah.
You know, just taking someone that's maybe been isolated for the last, 6 or 7 years. They know they need to get out. They know there's a senior center. They've had a lot of losses. They're not as comfortable with themselves as they used to be. We know if they would actually step through the door, and Marlene over at LSCO or Randy over at Norbridge spend a little time with them. So we'll actually go with them. Maybe 1, 2, 3 sessions before they've got that good connection, and we can withdraw from that particular resource. So that's one of the benefits that we can offer is we get that mobility. I used to tell people that were concerned about a family member that actually needed mental health care, but they couldn't access it because the person wasn't volunteering to go along with it, maybe not having insight into it, or perhaps it had a bad experience and just wasn't prepared to go that way. I'd say, well, you got to go get a judge's warrant. And it wasn't until I actually went myself to work on a judge's warrant for a person that didn't have a family in Lethbridge that I realized I was asking a family already in distress to add more stress to their life as they would go to the courthouse and try to go through the steps of obtaining the right office and the right crown prosecutor and to the judge. And so it's now the exception that we would just say go there. We're there with them as they go through that process, and sometimes take the stand when it's difficult for the family to do that.
These figures were quoted by the Canadian Mental Health that 1 in 5 Canadian will at some point or another encounter some form of mental illness, and 1 in 3 apparently, from my understanding, don't seek help largely because it has been stigmatized, or they don't have the information or the awareness of how to go about it. Are those figures fairly accurate?
I would say so. Before I stepped into the role I'm in now, I worked more frontline doing a lot of that information referral and triage. And I think the main piece of advice I give anyone, my friends, my family, anyone I see that might be looking for that information is just ask. There are amazing, whether it's a church group, a community group, a service organization, chances are somebody knows where to turn. And we're trying to develop more and more resources so that there is more entry points to find great teams like Val's or resources through CMHA that aren't necessarily the distress line. Right. So we run a program called Community Links that is a resource of all of the different services here in Lethbridge that people might need, and we're ever expanding, it's ever changing, and by all means it doesn't unfortunately capture absolutely everyone. it's an ongoing work in progress. And it can be quite intimidating when, if you're looking for a service, you're handed an 80-page booklet and said, here. So we're working to increase from having a number to call in to actually having a storefront where people can actually go to the library, talk to somebody and find that information they need, or call Home Base, or call Canadian Mental Health, or call Alberta Works, or go in there, or go to AHS and ask those questions. So there are these different entry points. And I know our program works with Val on a number of things, and if there's something, if we run into somebody that we think might be appropriate for Val's team, we'll make that referral. And I know, Val, you would make the referral to other agencies in the same way.
Do you have the number offhand for the community links for any of our listeners that might?
I do. If you give me half a second, I can even flip to that page.
Okay.
So the community links phone number is currently 403-328-LINK. And it's also an online resource that can be reached at community-links.ca.
You mentioned work earlier on and statistics. I haven't seen recent figures, but it's my understanding that the number one reason that a person obtains a medical leave from a doctor in Canada today is a...
in disability insurance, and I was working with the American side of things, but that's quite reflective of what we saw as well.
So we need to normalize it and reduce the stigma attached to it, so that a person can actually retreat from the workplace if they need, and can re-engage the workplace without the prejudice of their departure. And I think we're making headway in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it would be accurate to say that a good part of that might be the thing with stress and work-related stress, anxieties, and this sort of thing that contribute to mental or emotional and mental issues while people are employed. And then additionally, the kind of that perhaps there's still a little bit of that leftover them and us kind of thing in the workplace, so there's not enough employee groups that can advocate for proper support. Is that being your experience, or is that this perhaps?
I mean, we see all sorts of people. I think everyone's situation is unique, whether it's stress from work, stress from the family, being laid off because of the economy, family losses, friend losses, pet losses for that matter. Everybody's going to come at it from a different point of view. Work is a huge part of our lives. Many of us, myself included, are defined by a lot of the work I do. I'm very passionate about my job and my hobbies and those sort of things, and the thought of losing that part of me, it would deal a blow to me and deal undue stress if I were in that situation.
The question that arises for me is what can, given that that's one of the problems with mental health awareness, and that's one of the main things, those four things that I mentioned at the beginning. But the question that arises for me, or that arose for me, was, what does one do? How can one help? What can one do to contribute to making that situation better? The average person. I mean, if one were an employee, let's say in a situation they were experiencing a crisis of some sort, but they found an unsympathetic employer, what does one do?
It's a tough situation because I think the reality is we're building towards that future, and I honestly feel we will get there one day. And we are closer now than we have ever been, but I don't know if we're quite there where people are truly feeling free of that stigma of it all. I think the main thing is finding somebody they trust that they can talk to, and if that's not somebody they have readily available to them, call the distress line of Southwest Alberta and make that call. Talk to a counselor at a school, at a workplace, at a church, wherever they might already have those connections, and see what resources and what help and what ear is available to them to listen.
It's certainly a broad field with so many different areas of where problems occur. Some of the things that we hope to address, or at least have a look at, are things like the current opioid crisis, the mental health. Apparently, that mental health is in universities and colleges across Canada is also a crisis that we hope to limit respect to the idea of what can one do constructively to hopefully build a healthier society and a better standard or degree of awareness and mental health in the community is looking at things like child's art. There's just published a book with Amazon specifically addressing, our theme is kindling kindness. Now her name is Constance Douglas, but she will be appearing on one of our future shows in which we hope to address just that, the basic idea of starting at the beginning with children and generating simple acts of kindness that will create a more forgiving, understanding, and growing, developing society amongst youngsters, and hopefully that could nip a good part of it in the bud, or at least maybe identify those people, those children who are having difficulties with some issues, and where they could perhaps require more care.
I think when we're talking about mental health promotion generally, part of that promotion is to encourage people to care for themselves.
Yes.
Many people that I encounter are very good at caring for other people. You know, they're looking after their kids or grandkids on one side, and on an aging parent needing maybe extra support home on the other side, involved in community and inadequate time schedules for themselves. So stressing that they need to become number one, to be self-ish in order to deal with the pressures and stressors that are impacting them in the workplace. But it is a challenge, and it's a challenge for people that's their nature, that's kind of where they've been for many years, to actually say no when they can, and sometimes when they, and say no without guilt. And so that's where, again, outside help can help them work with that. Depression causes inactivity, and inactivity causes depression. So as hard as it is for the person that is immobilized by their mood, we look for the smallest steps that they can take to become more active. I remember working with one person, the goal was to walk around the block, but we felt great success when they got from the door to the end of the driveway, just to be a little bit more active.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So, with regard to the idea of anti-stigmatization, or trying to prevent the kind of stigmatization that those with mental health issues encounter, what would you suggest in terms of being the primary place to start?
Anywhere, wherever you are. I mean, you mentioned the stats that I've heard many times, that 1 in 5 Canadians at some point in their life are going to experience some sort of a mental illness. That's not a small percentage of Canadians. And so the idea that this is a very secluded problem that affects only a very select few, and yes, every case is different, but it's across the board, it's across Canada, it's across Lethbridge, it's across absolutely everywhere where any of us are. So I don't think there's one single place to start the anti-stigmatization, whether it's the seniors, grandparents, parents, or going into schools and doing that preventative work where we are fostering that society of acceptance. I think it's all equally important.
I recall working for ADAC here in Lethbridge years ago when President Ford was leader across the line, and following his tenure, Betty Ford ran into difficulty with substances. She went public with it. She put resources behind it and developed the Betty Ford treatment centers. And we saw a significant increase in the number of women that were coming in for treatment. With her disclosing the challenge, they weren't having to hide it so deeply, and were prepared to step out and get help at that time. And I think in the past year, I've been very impressed, to take my hats off to those individuals, many of them celebrities for a variety of reasons, whether it's awards or entertainment, that have shared with the world their challenge. Recently, Prince Harry and Prince William sharing the challenge for them as children to deal with their mother's passing, and sharing how they got treatment and joining forces with others who have similar stories. That just makes it a little bit easier for us to access without feeling like somehow we're going to get tarred with a black brush.
It's been suggested by some that words is the use of words and language itself, and the negative connotation that's often given to people on various issues. And I mean, we've all experienced it, we've all seen examples of it. The words like lunatic or crazy or nut bar certainly indicate a real problem in our society itself. I mean, not necessarily widespread, but when those things go uncorrected, when people aren't called on that sort of thing, definitely a matter of education, it would seem to me, where the initiative takes place to address.
Part of Mental Health Week, I understood, because early in the week there was a couple of hats on my admin supports desk, and it's hats off for mental health, and I understand a number of schools were quite participated in that, and engaging in a discussion regarding mental health and mental wellness, and we just got to talk to each other. That's right. And it can be a more friendly subject. And you mentioned kindness. I think we just need, as a culture, we need to be kind and caring. And to use put downs and bully is at the opposite end of the spectrum. We just need to have models, role models in our government and our politics that know how to be kind and set the example right on down to the sandbox.
I think this key word, you touched on the key word there, we just need to talk about. And that's why we're gathered here tonight. So maybe this is a good time to take a little break for now.
I would just like to thank you for the invitation. I always enjoy discussing this particular topic, but I now need to leave to encounter or engage in another Mental Health Week activity.
I understand completely. Well, thank you very much.
Welcome back. This is Jess FM online radio, and we're having a conversation and discussion today regarding mental health and mental wellness. And we're kicking this off today, and we'll be going for the rest of the month every week at 8 p.m. Thursdays, talking about this. Today, we were talking about different accessibility with a number of local people here in Lethbridge who work with different mental health agencies. And we're still joined right now with David, is it Gaubert? Gaubert, yes. Sorry. I know your first name, but I never, yeah. And I'm so glad we can have this conversation. And on our break there, we were talking a little bit, and so we want to talk now about intersectionality when it comes to mental health services and accessing them. And I was saying with you, a lot of my experience is working with people, particularly from more marginalized communities, whether that be trans people, queer people, things like that. is sometimes they don't feel comfortable accessing support. So it's kind of a two-part question: is what is your organization and other organizations you work with doing to provide more tailored support for those people and make them more comfortable, as well what other resources or what you would recommend to people who might not be comfortable?
So to answer the first part of that question, we touched on it a bit before the break, that every person's going to approach their mental wellness or their mental health from a completely different perspective. So even though I might have depression and my best friend might have depression, it doesn't mean we're experiencing the same things. That's not how our emotions are going to work. We're going to have two very different experiences, or even around this table, the three of our life experiences have no doubt been completely different. So what I might need to treat my mental health might be different than yours, or might be different than yours, David. And so we recognize that. At the same time, we recognize that people often have a much simpler time talking to somebody who has gone through something. That's why programs such as AA or that support group model is so successful. And we know that people can get on that recovery path and not be defined by a mental illness, but instead be defined by who they are and that sense of acceptance. And that's what we want to encourage. And so we find what we call peer mentors. And there's a huge push across CMHA, but also across Alberta and across Canada for peer support programs in every walk of life. Not just for addictions and mental health, but for people to mentor people through, this worked for me, have you thought of this or tried this? Because often all it takes is that simple question saying, hey, this worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you. Maybe it won't, because you're a completely different person than I am. But maybe you've never thought of it. So let's try that and see where it leads us. And so we are working on setting up groups for grandparents who might be having children that they are the guardians of, that are suffering from a mental illness, and how to talk to them about that. And not talk about it with a professional or a counselor, but talk about it with other grandparents or other parents who are going through the same sort of conversations. Locally here, we are very blessed to be a part of the Blackfoot Nation and a part of the Blackfoot culture here. And so we work very closely with local elders to set up support groups so that people can go into a teepee and find that cultural connection and find that support there. I have been very blessed to work in the LGBTQ community here and just try and create a place where people can come and feel safe to be themselves and find that acceptance. And I would consider all of those to be different forms of peer support, the different places where people can go and they can feel free to talk to somebody. And even though mental health might not be the focus of some of these places, people still feel free to talk about those sort of things if they feel they already have that connection with somebody. And so it doesn't matter where you are. If you feel like you belong there, open up. See if there is somebody that's willing to talk and willing to listen. And there's a good chance you might find somebody who is willing to lend that ear or lend that support. Of course, there are always those cases where that's not going to be the case. Say I'm working in a workplace that is hostile towards the idea of mental health being a recognizable illness, something that I would probably lose my job, and that is a reality for people out there, or be ostracized by family or friends if you're apart from the baseline, the expectation, the average, so to speak. There are services, and that's where a lot of Val's outreach and some of our own connections try to come into play. So we do have an open door policy that we don't have any requirements for anybody coming in and accessing things either through community links at our front desk, at the front desk at home base where they look after a lot of the housing services, Arches for a lot of the addiction services. Really any of the agencies in the community, we all meet and we all talk about what resources are out there, what's available, and we try and have that network available so that if they walk in my door tomorrow morning, that we can say, you know what, we might not be the right place for you, but have you thought of trying A, B, or C? And sending them in these places and getting to a point where people can access any one of our services, and we have this great collaborative network here in the city of Lethbridge, because Lethbridge is a great size for this sort of collaboration, where I can pick up the phone and call David or call yourself, Dylan, and say, hey, here's what's going on. Do you have any advice? And my experience is 9 times out of 10 working in this field, people will have advice, an answer, or at least give me another name to call.
No, I completely agree with you, and that's one of the things that I absolutely love about this city that we're based out of here, because with myself being fairly public in certain circles and a lot of the work that I do socially, I'm often the first or second point of contact for people, so I'm seeing it both ways as well. And with my focus right now, I don't work as closely with a lot of organizations anymore in any official capacities, whereas I used to. But I still have those connections, and people still know me as one of those connections, right? So I'll have people contacting me and saying, hey, can I put this person in touch with you? And I might be able to offer them some support. I might be able to direct them on to different resources. Hey, check out this. What are you looking for? And I think that's one of the key things that a lot of people, when they're interacting with someone that they know personally, sometimes aren't thinking through the process of, okay, what is it that you're actually looking for and you need and you're exploring. And so sometimes, whether or not I can offer that, just being able to help somebody through that process. Okay, so you're looking for something more as a parent of a child who's going through something. Now, is this more about gender? Is this more about sexuality? Now, what kind of focuses or resources should we be connecting you with?
Yeah, there are so many for absolutely everything. I could not even begin to list the diverse number of questions that I've heard in the 6 short months that I got to work frontline and answer those phones. It was across the board, everything from gender identity to mental health to I've just lost my job to I'm getting an eviction notice. And there are resources for it all. And it's a tough system to navigate, even as somebody a part of it. And the fact of the matter is we're stronger as a community, as a network, than we ever will be as a single person, as a single agency. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Dylan. That's the best thing we can do.
Absolutely. And one of the other points of conversation I wanted to bring up is a little bit about fatigue. And it comes in line with this part of the conversation a little bit about being those people involved in that peer support and helping people. And I know a lot of people who try to be that contact point, including myself, have experienced that burnout and fatigue. And I'm sure that's something, even though this is something you're doing that hopefully you're getting paid for, and you're doing it as a job, it's still, there's this emotionally draining component to it as well, right?
Yes.
And how do you deal with that? And what advice do you have for people, sometimes like myself?
Totally.
And I'm just like, I really want to help. I can't deal with anything else right now.
We see compassion fatigue surely in our organizations, but possibly even more often in the families or the organic support networks that already exist. And the best thing, but often the hardest thing, is knowing your personal limits and knowing when you can say no. Val touched on it a bit before the break, but knowing just what to say yes to, how much to take on yourself, and when to say, hey, you know what, I really want you to get help, and this isn't me saying you don't need help, this is me saying I'm not the right person to help you. And to try and help them find a different place to go, or say, maybe call this number. I'm not an expert on say, mental health, but if you call the distress line, they might know where to turn. So that's the biggest thing. And second to that, self-care. Definitely, me personally, and it can be stressful when you're dealing with some very complicated situations that there isn't an easy overnight answer for. A myriad of everything the world has to offer, because it can be trying and tough. When I hear those stories, it does affect me. I'm in this field because I want to make the world a better place, and the reality is it's not an overnight fix. It's something I hopefully I'm not doing the rest of my life, because hopefully the world's fixed by then, but at the same time I probably will be, and I'll be happy to do so. but I have to take time for myself. So whether that's something as simple as sitting back and having a cup of coffee, whether that's something as simple as going for a walk with my family, going to the park, taking an overnight trip, or sitting down with a good book. Having those things that are your own outlets of creativity and knowing who you are, apart from everybody that you are trying to help, or any of the situations or any of the work. And I think that applies to any job. I mean, my dad was a mechanic, and he ran into it all the time too, where sometimes there would just be that one car that would be that much harder to fix than the others, and there was no reason why. And so he would find these other outlets to work through that stress. Often spending time with us, or oftentimes just going out on his dirt bike and riding around the field for a couple hours and having some time for himself. For myself, whenever I need to burn off steam, I am an avid theater goer. I love acting, I love watching theater, those sort of things. So I will often immerse myself in those sort of activities just to take the weight of the world off for a bit. And remember who I am apart from my job, because I think we often get defined by what we do on a regular basis, but we are so much more multifaceted and complicated people than that one individual thing that we might do from 9 to 5 each day.
Mm-hmm. Along with the self-care, I think it's very important to not only be a support for other people, but to line up your own supports.
Yes.
Right? And I think sometimes we get this idea of ourselves as being stronger than we are, that we can help everyone else and we want to. And when Val was here earlier, he was talking a little bit about sort of that putting yourself first and that self-care, right? And caring for other people. And we use that, I think, sometimes to cope, so we can avoid taking care of ourselves.
Yeah. Finding that, for me personally, finding that ear to listen to when I do hit a wall, when I do hit a crisis, has been invaluable. Somebody that I know is just going to sit there and listen. They might not have advice, but I might not need advice. I just need somebody to open up to, and somebody to know that I'm not alone in all this. And we do live in a great community, and no matter where you are, I don't think anyone in this community is alone. However, it can often feel like there is no one to turn to and nowhere to go. And it can be hard in those darkest moments to remember that there are people to turn to, no matter where you are.
And to feel sometimes like it's okay.
Yes, of course. It's always okay to turn to somebody. I mean, there's the old quote, "No man is an island," and that certainly holds true today. I could not do any of the things I do without the teamwork that I have around me, for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's a question that I've often considered in terms of just the field of mental health, mental wellness, and so on. This very idea that, well, of course, it's based deeply in psychology and psychiatry has developed in that. But at the heart of it, it's got to be based on philosophy. What is consciousness? What is awareness? What is human experience and this sort of thing? And these are the kind of questions that sometimes I find myself. And I find that I question sometimes whether a good part of it isn't just conventionality. The societal convention, so that if somebody might be a creative genius, but everybody thinks he's off his rocker, and doesn't. I guess my question is, when it comes to research and that whole other so-called pillar that you referred to earlier, how aware are those folks like yourself working in the field of mental health and that sort of thing of what kind of research is being done? Is it research that's being done into actually those sorts of things? What the nature, what is consciousness? How our experience and all of these sorts of things, or is it funded by those that just want to make everybody do the same?
I mean, there's a fine balance between it both, because a lot of these issues, the mental health issues that we run up against, some of them are chemical in the brain,
Yes, indeed.
and are very much biologically and scientifically and psychologically rooted.
Right.
I'm no expert on that side of things at all. In a lot of my line of work, we focus more on recovery-oriented programs. So we focus on trying to help people find their path to take, their journey, no matter what path or what journey that is, but on a journey towards mental wellness and the recovery, and to help them move past that stigma that is inherent in a lot of the mental illnesses, and move on to the next phase of their lives, and find those meaningful activities, those networks, those people they can talk to. And really focus on that recovery. And I think that's key to that human consciousness. I mean, we all have different pastimes, for example, different ways that we relax. And I think that is a key part of many of the journeys that I have been very privileged to see in my very short career in this field so far.
I think that's a very positive note to end on, and I think the very idea of paths and individual journeys and all being part of the human experience, and it's terrific to have had you here tonight, David.
Thank you.
And Dylan, thank you for your company. And
thank you.
You're very, probably more eloquently stated questions than my own, but you've done it, both of you.
Oh, I just have lots of mental health experience. That's another story.
It's 1 in 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much both for having me. It's been marvelous. And all the best for the rest of the month on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. So.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And we'll be talking about those sorts of things, those paths that you mentioned. Good. Very good. Thank you for both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.